Hello, night owl. Sleep isn't easy, is it? Especially when your mind is full and life around you just won't quiet down. That's okay. I'm awake too. So close your eyes for a moment and let me tell you a story. Since we're friends now, I'd love to know your thoughts, your life, and the city you're listening to tonight. But for now, put your phone screen away, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and just listen. Our story begins. Tonight, we travel back more than 5,000 years to a time when the Nile was the center of everything, a living ribbon of water flowing through endless, golden sands. This was the dawn of civilization, the moment when two ancient lands, the red land of the north and the white land of the south, learned to breathe as one. The story you'll hear tonight is about the first kings of Egypt, the Pharaohs, and how they turned a river's rhythm into the heartbeat of an empire that would last for thousands of years. So, close your eyes, slow your thoughts, and let's go back to where it all began, to the birth of Egypt and the rise of the first pharaohs. Close your eyes and imagine a long, slow river, not rushing, but steady, patient, a ribbon of life cutting through a quiet land. This is the Nile. For thousands of years, it rose and fell like breathing. It carried the sky's light and brought the soil's promise. Along its banks, crops grew with a faithfulness that felt like a kind of miracle. People planted, the waters returned, and each year life began again. In this place, a civilization grew out of that rhythm, not from a single sudden idea, but from very ordinary things. Seeds sown at the right time, a child learning to weave, reeds, an elder remembering when the rains came early. Villages clustered where the land was kind, and where villages met, small chiefs began to count more than their neighbors. They spoke with visitors, they organized labor, they collected grain to store for hard seasons. Slowly, quietly, leadership took shape. It is easy to imagine the first leaders as grand from the very start, but the truth is softer. The early rulers were first and foremost people who could bring others together, to repair a canal, to organize a harvest, to bake bread for the hungry. Over generations, their houses grew, their names mattered, and their duties became rituals. Because the Nile gave life, those who could read its moods gained a kind of respect that looked almost like reverence. Over time, a larger idea emerged. What if one person could speak for all the river's people? If the Nile was the thread that bound life together, perhaps a single voice could guide the weaving. So the idea of a king, later called the Pharaoh, was born not simply as ruler, but as guardian of balance. The Egyptians called that balance mat, order, truth, and rightness. A leader who kept mat was a leader who kept the fields fertile, the boats afloat, and families fed. The shift from many small chiefs to one symbol of unity did not happen in a day. It took centuries of alliances, marriages, conflicts, and gentle persuasion. On the map of memory, there are names whispered down the ages, names like Menes, sometimes called Narmer, who are remembered for the act of bringing upper and lower lands together. Whether the story unfolded exactly as the oldest tales say matters less than the feeling it left. People began to see themselves as part of a single river people, with a single house of rulers standing for continuity. Once unification existed, the pharaoh's role was both practical and sacred. He or she organized farms and canals, yes, but also stood beneath the god's authority. The pharaoh was imagined as the living bridge between the human world and the divine. In festivals and on temple walls, kings were shown as favored by the sun god, embraced by the sky goddess, and protected by guardians who wore the faces of animals and stars. In those early centuries, the symbols of kingship became important. A tall crown bore the shape of the two lands. A shepherd's crook and a flail symbolized care and discipline. A throne proclaimed order. These were not mere ornaments, but promises. A promise that the leader would work to hold the fragile fabric of life together. When a pharaoh performed rituals by the Nile, offerings were made, not only from wealth, but from hope, that floods would come in season, that sickness would pass, that children would grow. And so large projects followed, to secure the harvest for future years. To honor the gods, communities pooled their labor. Stone began to replace mud, and simple tombs beneath the sand gave way to great, ordered fields of stone and earth. The earliest monuments were not vanity, but memory places where names would be kept and where a community could return in times of drought or joy to remember who they were. Think of those first monumental constructions as the slow workings of patient minds and steady hands, quarrying, shaping, hauling. It was work in rhythm with the river, a human echo to the cycles of nature. Entire villages sometimes paused their normal life to raise a stone wall or to set a carved lintel in place. There was no hurry, only purpose, and a kind of communal breath that matched the seasons. Within the palace, life mixed the ordinary with the ceremonial. A pharaoh might taste bread by candlelight, confer with advisors, and then, under a dawn sky, lead a procession to place offerings before an image of a god. The people watched such events with the same quiet attention they gave to the river. Rituals mattered because they reminded everyone of an order greater than daily troubles. The idea of the pharaoh was also a story, told in art, men and women with the same face as the ruler, sculpted so that history looked steady and kindly. On temple walls, scenes showed grain offered in long rows, boats sliding like quiet thoughts over mirror-flat waters, and the pharaoh smiting foes in older heroic tales. These images did not only celebrate power, they were lessons, instructions about how the world should be calm, ordered, generous. At night, when the river reflected 1,000 points of starlight, the people might tell stories of earlier rulers. Some praised for wisdom, others remembered for times of struggle. They told how a good ruler could bring prosperity, and how a bad one could let chaos creep in. These stories were never purely political. They were also moral, reminding each listener about kindness, patience, and the small ways people could keep mat in their own hearths. So, in the beginning, the story of the pharaoh is gentle and gradual. It is the story of a river, people learning to imagine themselves as a single tapestry. It is the story of leaders who were builders and priests, farmers and guardians, each acting to preserve the fragile balance that meant life in the valley. And everywhere, beneath the daily tasks, runs the patient rhythm of the Nile, a rhythm that shaped a civilization's heartbeat. We will pause here, where the river's slow music meets the first stones of memory. When you are ready, we will move on to the age of great monuments, when rulers reach for the sky and shape stone into eternity. and to the stories of the kings who gave their names to the sands. For now, breathe slowly and let the Nile's long song ease you onward. The Nile continued to flow, steady as time itself. Seasons changed, floods came and went, and along its fertile banks two great lands grew, the red land of the north and the white land of the south. For centuries, they lived in quiet tension, each believing their gods favored them most. The north, known as Lower Egypt, stretched wide and flat near the sea, its people skilled in trade and fishing. The south, Upper Egypt, narrow and ancient, was home to proud farmers and hunters who guarded their traditions closely. Two lands, two crowns, two dreams of order, divided by geography, but bound by the same river that gave them life. And then came a man whose name would echo through stone and sand alike. Also known to some as Menes, the first pharaoh. They say he dreamed of peace, not through battle, but through harmony. Yet peace in the ancient world rarely came without blood. The legends carved upon temple walls show Narmer holding his enemy by the hair, his arm raised high with a club. But in those same carvings, another image appears, two crowns joined together. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. It was more than a symbol. It was destiny written in limestone. From that moment on, Egypt was born, not as two rivals, but as one eternal kingdom stretching from the deserts to the delta. Narmer called himself more than a king. He was the living Horus, the falcon god's presence on earth, chosen to bring balance between heaven and men. To rule Egypt meant more than commanding armies or collecting tribute. It meant maintaining the fragile harmony between the seen and unseen. Every sunrise, every flood, every harvest depended on the pharaoh's heart remaining pure and steady. Imagine, for a moment, the weight of a civilization resting quietly on the shoulders of one man who must be both warrior and priest, ruler and dreamer. That was the burden and the divinity of the first pharaohs. Under Narmer's rule, Egypt began to take its first true form. Cities of mud, brick, and limestone emerged along the Nile, small at first, then grander with each generation. Abydos, Memphis, Hierakonpolis, names that would one day echo with prayers and incense. People lived by the rhythm of the river. When the floods receded, they sowed barley and wheat. When the waters returned, they waited and worshipped. Art flourished, writing took shape, and for the first time, Egypt began to remember itself. Symbols scratched onto pottery and stone evolved into the first hieroglyphs, tiny pictures carrying immense meaning. Every temple wall became a scroll of faith, every carving a story meant to last forever. The sun rose slowly over the sands, casting long golden shadows across the banks of the Nile. The world had grown quieter now, more stable, more certain of itself. Egypt was united, the gods were pleased, and a long line of pharaohs had begun shaping the land in their image. Each king believed he was chosen to continue the balance of Mat, truth, order, and eternity. But the question echoed in every heart: how could a mortal being truly become eternal? The answer, they decided, would be carved in stone. The early kings had built tombs of mud brick, small sanctuaries for their souls to rest within. But as centuries passed, their vision grew bolder. They wanted to rise toward the heavens, to leave behind monuments that would never crumble with time. The pharaohs began to dream of eternity, not in whispers or prayers, but in the language of architecture. It began in a place called Saqqara, with a man whose name was Djoser. He ruled during Egypt's third dynasty, around 2,600 years before the birth of Christ. Djoser was not content with simple walls or tombs. He wanted something the world had never seen, a stairway to the sky. And so he called upon a genius, his architect and high priest, Imhotep. Imhotep was no ordinary builder. He was a thinker, a mathematician, a man who understood the harmony between the heavens and the earth. Under his guidance, the first great pyramid began to rise, not smooth-sided like the ones we know, but built in steps, one upon another, reaching ever higher. The step pyramid of Djoser was born, the first monumental stone structure in human history. Imagine it. 6 massive terraces of limestone stacked against the desert horizon, gleaming white in the sun. For the people of Egypt, it was not just a tomb, it was a promise, a bridge for their pharaoh to ascend to the gods, and a symbol that their civilization had achieved something divine. When the wind brushed across its surface, it carried whispers of prayers and songs, echoing into eternity. The step pyramid became a model for the ages. Other kings sought to build their own eternal homes, greater and more perfect. The art of pyramid building evolved, the designs smoother, the slopes more graceful. By the time of the 4th dynasty, the age of true wonder had arrived, and at its heart stood a name that would live forever. Khufu. Khufu's vision was unlike any before him. He wanted to create something beyond imagination, something that would outlast all kingdoms, all memories, all time. His architects and workers began their colossal task near the city of Giza. They quarried stone from distant cliffs, dragged it across the desert, and shaped each block with care and precision. For 20 years they worked, thousands upon thousands of men, artisans, engineers, laborers, and priests. They aligned the pyramid with the stars, ensuring that every edge mirrored the cosmos above. When it was done, it rose 481 feet high, the Great Pyramid of Giza, a mountain of human devotion and celestial purpose. To the people, it was more than stone. It was the horizon of eternity. Within its hidden chambers, Khufu would rest, his spirit rising with the sun god Ra, sailing across the heavens each day before descending into the underworld at night. The pyramid stood not as a tomb of death, but as a gateway of rebirth. 2 more kings followed Khufu's son, who built his own pyramid beside his father's, and Menkaure, who completed the trio at Giza together. Their monuments formed a sacred alignment with the stars of Orion's belt, the celestial home of Osiris, Lord of the afterlife. To the Egyptians, this alignment was no accident. It was a map of eternity, written in stone, a reflection of heaven on earth, and standing guard nearby, with the body of a lion and the face of a pharaoh, was the great Sphinx, silent, majestic, and timeless. Some say it bears Khafure's features. Others believe it is older still, a guardian of mysteries, lost to time. Its eyes have seen the desert shift, the stars drift, and empires rise and fall, yet it remains unmoving, watching over the river and the souls of kings. As Egypt entered its golden age, the pharaohs became more than rulers. They were architects of immortality. Every pyramid, every temple, every statue was an attempt to reach the divine. but the cost was immense. Thousands of lives were spent in the pursuit of perfection. Workers toiled under the blazing sun, hauling stones that weighed as much as a man's dreams. Priests sang hymns to keep the gods pleased, while overseers marked time by the beating of drums and the length of shadows. And yet, in their hearts, they believed they were part of something greater than themselves. To build for the Pharaoh was to serve eternity. Every strike of the chisel, every drop of sweat was a prayer, a way to ensure that Egypt's name would never fade as generations passed. The age of the pyramid builders began to wane. The grandeur remained, but the faith shifted. The pharaohs turned their focus southward to new cities. The pyramids, once blazing with white limestone, began to weather under the desert wind. The sands rose around them, whispering secrets to those who would listen. Still, they endured. The Great Pyramid of Giza stood through wars, storms, and the slow decay of centuries. It remained, and still remains, a monument not only to a king, but to the human will, to our desire to be remembered, to reach for something eternal. As night falls over the desert, the stars return to their ancient places, glimmering faintly above those silent monuments. The same constellations that watched over the builders still shine tonight. Somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of Khufu sails across the sky with Ra, watching over the land he once ruled, and the pyramids that bear his name. The wind moves softly over the sand, carrying with it the breath of history, quiet, endless, eternal. And beneath that vast Egyptian sky, the stone giants sleep, dreaming of the days when gods and men built together under the same sun, asterisk as the golden sun slipped beneath the horizon. The ancient Egyptians believed that life itself began a new journey, one that mirrored the path of their mighty sun god, Ra. Just as Ra sailed across the heavens by day and descended into darkness by night, so too did the human soul voyage into the unseen world when life on earth came to an end. To die, they believed, was not to vanish. It was to begin again, to pass through the Duat, the mysterious realm of the dead. The Duat was not a place of endless rest, nor of simple reward or punishment. It was a vast and shifting world beneath the earth, filled with rivers of fire, lakes of stars, and gates guarded by creatures beyond imagination. Each soul had to journey through it, guided by spells, prayers, and the favor of the gods. When a person's final breath left their body, their Ka, the vital life force, was released. It lingered close, while the Ba, the wandering spirit, often shown as a bird with a human head, began its travels. Together, these two parts of the soul would one day reunite to become the Ak, the immortal self. But first, the soul had to face the Duat and prove itself worthy of eternity. The journey began with the tomb itself. The walls were carved with sacred texts, spells from the Book of the Dead, coffin texts, and pyramid texts. These writings were not poems or prayers in the way we know them. They were maps, instructions for the soul, like stars guiding a sailor through the night. Each line had power. Each symbol had purpose. To forget even one could mean being lost forever in the darkness. The soul would awaken in a strange twilight world, a reflection of Egypt, but distorted and dreamlike. There were deserts and rivers, mountains of flame, and endless caverns of shadow. Strange beings moved through this land, serpents made of fire, crocodile-headed demons, and gods with faces of animals and stars. The duat was dangerous, yet it was also divine. Every trial faced, there was a mirror of one's own heart. At the gates of the underworld stood Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and protector of souls. With calm eyes, he greeted the dead and wrapped them in safety, guiding them toward the great hall of judgment. In that hall sat Osiris, lord of the afterlife, the green-skinned god of resurrection and eternal life. Around him stood 42 divine judges, each representing a law of truth. The air shimmered with power, and the scent of lotus flowers floated across the chamber. The soul knelt before Osiris, trembling yet hopeful, as the most sacred moment of eternity began. This was the weighing of the heart from the chest of the dead. The heart was taken, not a symbol, but believed to be the seat of thought, emotion, and memory. Anubis placed it on one side of a great golden scale. On the other side lay a single feather belonging to Ma'at, goddess of truth and cosmic balance. Silence filled the hall. The heart was weighed not by its size, but by its truth. Every lie told, every cruelty committed, every selfish act would make it heavier. If the heart was pure, if it was as light as Ma'at's feather, the soul was declared righteous, true of voice, and allowed to enter the eternal fields. But if it was heavy with sin, it would fall, and the waiting creature, Ammit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, would devour it in a single bite. For such a soul, there was no second life, no dawn, no memory. Those who passed the test were led into Aru, the field of reeds, a perfect reflection of the best parts of Egypt. The air was always warm, the Nile always full, the harvest always ripe. Families reunited, farmers worked their fields in peace, and kings sailed across the eternal river under a sky that never darkened. Here, time had no power. The sun shone forever. Before kings ruled Egypt, before pyramids touched the sky, there was a time of gods walking among men. Their footsteps shaped the earth, their words moved the Nile, and their love and anger carved destiny itself. Among them was Osiris, the first great ruler of the land, wise, gentle, and just. It was said that when Osiris spoke, crops would bloom, the river would rise, and even the fiercest hearts would soften. At his side stood Isis, his queen and sister, a goddess of magic, healing, and devotion. Her love for Osiris was endless, like the river that never stopped flowing. Together, they brought harmony to the world. They taught people how to grow crops, to build homes, to honor the gods and each other. Egypt flourished under their care, and for a while, it seemed peace would last forever. But peace rarely lasts when jealousy stirs in the shadows. Watching Osiris with eyes dark as the underworld was his brother, Set, the god of chaos, desert, and storms. Where Osiris brought life, Set brought emptiness. Where Osiris inspired love, Set sowed fear. Deep in his heart burned envy, envy that consumed him like fire in dry reeds. He believed that the throne should have been his, and so Set devised a plan. He built a magnificent chest, carved from cedar and inlaid with gold and lapis lazuli. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever seen. During a grand feast, when music and laughter filled the hall, Set stood before the guests and said, "To honor my beloved brother, I have made this chest fit only for a king. Whoever fits perfectly inside it shall have it as a gift. One by one, the guests tried, laughing as they lay inside, but none fit. At last, Osiris stepped forward, smiling, trusting his brother completely. As soon as Osiris lay inside, Set's eyes gleamed with cruel delight. He slammed the lid shut, sealed it with molten lead, and threw it into the Nile. The waters swallowed it whole. The music stopped. The torches dimmed. The gods of Egypt wept, for their king had vanished beneath the river's surface. When Isis heard what had happened, her heart shattered. But she did not give in to despair. She vowed to find her husband, no matter how long it took. Dressed in plain linen, she left her throne and wandered the earth disguised as a mortal. Through burning deserts, through whispering marshes, she searched, guided only by love and the faint memory of his voice. After many trials, she found the chest washed ashore in a faraway land, hidden among reeds near a great tree. She held it close, and her tears fell on the wood like rain. She brought the body back to Egypt, hiding it deep in the delta, hoping to one day bring Osiris back to life. But Set discovered her secret. Furious that his plan had failed, he tore the body of Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across the land into the river, the sand, and the mountains, so that no one could ever find him again. Yet love is stronger than cruelty. Isis began her search once more, joined by her sister Nephthys, the goddess of mourning. Together they gathered the fragments of Osiris's body, one by one. Each place where a piece was found became sacred ground, marked by temples that still whisper his name through the desert winds. When at last she had found all but one part, she used her magic to restore him, her tears, her spells, and her heart binding him together. And then, under the silver light of the moon, she breathed life back into Osiris. But Osiris could not remain among the living. His body, though whole, was touched by death. Instead, he descended into the Duat, becoming the lord of the underworld, not as a punishment, but as a king of the next realm. There he ruled over the dead, offering judgment, mercy, and eternal peace. His resurrection marked the promise that death was not an ending, but a transformation. Before he departed, Osiris and Isis shared one final night together. From their union was born Horus, the falcon-headed god destined to avenge his father and reclaim Egypt from Set's darkness. When Horus came of age, he stood before the gods, tall and radiant like the morning sun. He challenged Set for the throne of Egypt. Their battle raged across the sky and desert for 80 long years. The storms they unleashed were said to be the very winds that sweep across Egypt, even now at times. Set's strength was terrifying, raw, and untamed. At others, Horus shone with calm fury, his wings cutting through the storm. Both gods suffered wounds that marked them forever. In one battle, Set tore out Horus's eye, but the god Thoth, master of wisdom, restored it. And that eye, the eye of Horus, became a symbol of healing, protection, and divine power. In the end, the Council of Gods declared Horus victorious. Set was banished to the desert he so loved, a place of emptiness and silence. Horus ascended the throne, bringing light and order back to Egypt. The people rejoiced, for once again harmony was restored, not through strength alone, but through justice and love. And from that time forward, every pharaoh who wore the crown of Egypt, was said to be the living embodiment of Horus, ruling with the wisdom of Osiris and the protection of Isis. The cycle continued, death, rebirth, and balance, as eternal as the sun rising over the Nile. Even now, when the desert wind hums softly at dusk, it seems to carry the faint echo of their story, a story not of gods and battles, but of love that defied death, of hope that conquered despair. And perhaps, as you lie there listening, you can almost imagine the flicker of torchlight on temple walls, the smell of lotus in the air, and Isis's whisper across the ages. What is broken can be found. What is lost can rise again. Asterisk. After the legends of Osiris and Horus faded into myth, Egypt entered a new dawn. The people looked upon their kings, the pharaohs, not merely as rulers, but as the living presence of Horus himself, the child of divine justice and light. Each pharaoh became a bridge between the heavens and the earth, a promise that order would reign and the Nile would keep its rhythm. The Nile's waters shimmered under the sun, and its floods brought life to the black soil year after year. Farmers sang to the river as they worked, believing their voices helped it rise. In distant villages, priests stood at dawn to greet the first light with hymns that echoed across the land. Egypt was more than a kingdom. It was a living body, and the pharaoh was its heart. But kings are not content with mere memory. They seek to carve their place into eternity. And so began the dream that would shape Egypt's golden age. The dream to build monuments so vast that they would outlast death itself in the city of Memphis. Near the edge of the desert, a great architect named Imhotep served King Djoser. Imhotep was no ordinary man. His mind was a mirror of divine wisdom. He looked upon the sun-baked sands and saw not emptiness, but potential, the foundation of something eternal. Until then, kings were buried in flat, rectangular tombs called mastabas. But Imhotep imagined something grander, a staircase of stone reaching toward the heavens. Under his guidance, the step pyramid of Saqqara was born. Layer by layer, the structure rose, 6 tiers of limestone stacked one upon another, gleaming white beneath the sun. It was the first pyramid, the first whisper of man's attempt to touch the sky. People came from across Egypt to see it, awed and silent. For the first time, humanity had turned death into architecture, something beautiful, not feared. When Djoser was laid to rest within, the people believed his spirit climbed each step toward the stars, joining the gods above. But Egypt's ambition did not stop there. Centuries later, another pharaoh dreamed even bigger. His name was Sneferu, a king with a vision, both daring and patient. He ordered not 1, but 3 great pyramids, each an experiment, a lesson carved in stone. The first collapsed, the second bent midway, as if bowing to the sky, but the third stood perfect, gleaming smooth as a mirror. It was the Red Pyramid, and its success marked the birth of Egypt's greatest age of building. From Sneferu's line came his son, the most famous of them all, Khufu, whom the Greeks would call Cheops. He would raise a monument so vast, so precise, that even now, thousands of years later, it stands defying wind and time. The Great Pyramid of Giza. Imagine it as it once was, not weathered and rough as today, but shining white, covered in polished limestone, its tip capped with gold that caught the sunrise. At dawn, it must have looked as though the sun itself had descended upon earth. Tens of thousands of workers, artisans, and priests moved in harmony, guided by mathematics, starlight, and devotion. Each block placed was a prayer. Each stone lifted was a heartbeat of faith. The air would have rung with rhythm, the beat of hammers, the murmur of chants, the sigh of desert wind over stone. And through it all, the belief endured that Khufu was not building a tomb. He was shaping a bridge between life and eternity to the Egyptians. Death was not an end, but a continuation, a doorway. Inside the pyramid's labyrinth, Khufu's body would rest in a chamber aligned perfectly with the stars of Orion, believed to be the home of Osiris. The pharaoh's soul, they said, would rise through those same stars to join the gods in everlasting light as years passed. The pyramids multiplied along the Giza plateau. The sons and grandsons of Khufu, Kafur, and Menkaure followed his example, each leaving behind a monument of their own. To guard these tombs, they carved a creature of legend, the Great Sphinx, half lion, half man, gazing eternally toward the rising sun. Its face, they say, carries the calm strength of Kafir, serene, knowing, timeless. At night, when the desert cooled and stars filled the sky, priests walked the causeways between temples and pyramids, their torches flickering like fireflies. As centuries passed, Egypt's golden light deepened. The pyramids still stood, proud, silent, and gleaming under the desert sun. But even kings began to realize that eternity carved in open stone could not last forever. The pyramids, magnificent as they were, drew attention not just from worshippers, but from those hungry for gold and power. Tomb robbers grew bold, slipping into sacred halls at night, prying open the treasures meant for gods. The pharaohs began to ask a question that echoed through every temple and court: can we hide eternity? And so began a new era, the age of secrecy, of shadowed valleys and hidden tombs. Far to the south, near the quiet city of Thebes, the land curved into a deep, dry gorge surrounded by jagged cliffs. The ancient Egyptians called it Tasaquitmat, the Great Field. Today we know it as the Valley of the Kings, Pir. Away from the open plains of Giza, pharaohs chose to rest in silence. The sun blazed above, but below the ground, artisans carved passageways through limestone, long corridors leading into the heart of the earth. The tombs were secret, unseen, and sacred. Each one was a world within a world, painted, written, and sealed with prayers meant to last forever. The walls glowed with stories: the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, the Amduat, all sacred texts meant to guide the pharaoh's soul through the night journey of the afterlife. Hieroglyphs danced across the stone in red, blue, and gold scenes of gods greeting the king, serpents guarding the gates, and stars lighting his way through the underworld to the Egyptians. Death was not a fall into darkness, it was a passage through it. Every symbol carved into those walls was a map, a guide for the soul to find its way home in one tomb. The ceiling shimmered with constellations, painted in indigo and dotted with gold stars. It was meant to mirror the heavens so that the pharaoh could sleep beneath the same sky he ruled beneath in life. In another, rivers of fire and fields of lilies intertwined symbols of destruction and renewal, fear and hope. The tombs were both prayer and art, masterpieces carved in silence. Away from the eyes of the living, the valley itself was quiet, except for the faint echo of chisels and the whisper of wind through the rocks. Every craftsman who entered these sacred places knew the work might outlast his name, his family, even his city. And perhaps that was comfort enough. When the Pharaoh died, the valley came alive in solemn procession. Priests in white linen carried his golden mask, chanting spells to protect his journey. The air was filled with incense, frankincense, and myrrh, heavy and sweet. The sarcophagus, made of black granite or gold, was lowered deep into the tomb, surrounded by treasures, food, statues, jewelry, weapons, and small carved servants called ushabtis that would come to life in the afterworld to serve their master once more. Then, as the final torch flickered, the stone door was sealed. The priests would brush sand across the entrance, whisper the Pharaoh's name one last time, and leave the valley in silence. Among the many who found their rest here were Amenhotep Seti and the great Ramses kings, whose names still echo softly through time. Their tombs lay hidden for millennia, unseen and undisturbed, or so it was hoped. Yet, even the desert keeps secrets imperfectly. Centuries later, whispers began of strange shafts leading nowhere, of hidden chambers behind crumbling walls. Some tombs were lost to floods, others to thieves, but some endured untouched, waiting for history to find them again. One such tomb belonged to a boy king, a ruler whose life was short, but whose afterlife became eternal, Tutankhamun. His name, once almost forgotten, would one day light the world with wonder. He ruled only briefly, a child guided by priests and regents, but his tomb was small, so small that perhaps no one thought to look there. For thousands of years, it slept beneath sand and stone, until, in 1922, a man named Howard Carter brushed away the dust of centuries and glimpsed the glint of gold when his candle first pierced the darkness. What he saw became legend: gleaming statues, golden chariots, thrones, and a mask so radiant it seemed alive. He had found not just a tomb, but the breath of a lost world. For a moment, it was as though the pharaohs themselves had awakened, their names spoken again after 3,000 years. The Valley of the Kings, long silent, sang once more a song of time, faith, and the fragile beauty of mortality. The tombs were no longer just graves. They were voices, messages from a civilization that believed death was not the end. And perhaps that's why we still listen. Because in their stillness, in their painted walls and carved prayers, the pharaohs remind us of something eternal, that even buried in silence, stories endure. Lose your eyes and imagine the ancient sands of Egypt stretching endlessly beneath a silver moon. The desert is silent, but within that silence lives the echo of 1,000 forgotten voices. The wind hums softly through broken temples, carrying whispers of those who once ruled the mightiest kingdom the world had ever known. Tonight, the stars lean close as we return to the age of the pharaohs, rulers whose names were carved not just into stone, but into eternity itself. Among them was a woman who defied every expectation. Her name was Hatshepsut, daughter of Thutmose I, wife of Thutmose II, and guardian of the throne. When her husband died and the next heir was only a child, Egypt needed stability, strength, and wisdom. And so, Hatshepsut stepped forward into the unthinkable. She declared herself Pharaoh. She wore the royal crown, the golden collar, and even the ceremonial false beard that symbolized kingship. Many in the court resisted her rule, whispering that a woman could not sit upon the throne of Horus. But she ruled not with fear, nor by conquest, but by intellect and grace. Her reign became one of peace. She ordered magnificent temples to be built, her most famous masterpiece being the great temple of Deir el-Bahari, carved directly into the cliffs of western Thebes. Its terraces rose upward like a staircase to heaven, blending perfectly with the rock and sky. In her time, trade flourished. She sent vast expeditions to the distant land of Punt, where her ships returned with treasures of gold, ivory, incense, and exotic trees. Under her hand, Egypt bloomed, but power is rarely without shadow. After Hatshepsut's death, her stepson, Thutmose III, ascended to power. He, perhaps out of pride or vengeance, began to erase her memory. Her statues were smashed, her name chiseled from walls, her achievements buried beneath the sand. Yet time, patient and fair, restored her legacy. Today, the world remembers her as one of Egypt's greatest rulers, the woman who became Pharaoh. Then came a ruler who would turn the entire kingdom upside down. His name was Akhenaten, born Amenhotep IV. Unlike those before him, he was not content to simply honor the gods. He sought to redefine them. He believed in one Aten, the radiant disk of the sun. He changed his name, closed the temples of the old gods, and declared Aten the only divine power worthy of worship. To the priests of Amen, this was heresy. To the people, confusion. But Akhenaten's faith burned fiercely. He moved Egypt's capital from Thebes to a new city he called Akheton, the horizon of Aten, where he built great open-air temples bathed in sunlight. There were no dark halls filled with statues, only the warmth of the sun above. His art, too, broke every tradition. Gone were the rigid, godlike depictions of the pharaoh. In their place came images of a man with long limbs, tender eyes, and a strange, elongated face. He was shown with his wife, Nefertiti, and their daughters in moments of affection, laughing and playing beneath the rays of Aten. For the first time in Egyptian history, art reflected life, love, and humanity. But revolutions rarely last. The priests of Ammon grew restless, the old gods impatient, and the people uncertain. When Akhenaten died, his city was abandoned. His name was cursed, erased, and his dream of a single sun god faded into myth. Yet the spark he lit, the idea of a divine unity, still glows faintly across time. It was said that one of his sons, or perhaps a young successor, restored the old ways and brought back the gods of Egypt. That boy was Tutankhamun. Akhenaten's name may have been forgotten for centuries, but his shadow lingers as one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. And then came Ramses II, Ramses the Great, a name that thundered through history. He ruled longer than most men lived, over 60 years of unmatched power. He was a warrior, a builder, a king who dreamed of immortality. His monuments still rise from the desert like mountains. The temples of Abu Simbel, carved into cliffs overlooking the Nile, remain his greatest triumph. The colossal statues of Ramses sit on their thrones, gazing across eternity, their faces calm and eternal, as if guarding the secrets of time itself. Ramses fought great wars, the most famous being the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, a battle so legendary that it became one of the earliest recorded in history, though neither side truly won. Ramses had his scribes carve tales of his triumph upon the temple walls, ensuring his name would forever be sung as a god of victory. Later, he signed one of the world's first peace treaties, proving that true strength lies not just in conquest, but in wisdom. Under his reign, Egypt reached the height of its glory, vast, rich, and thriving. He built cities, monuments, and temples, all bearing his name. Every corner of Egypt whispered it. Even the air seemed to hum with it. When Ramses died, his mummy was laid to rest in splendor, wrapped in linen and gold. The desert night was quiet again, and the moonlight danced across the Nile. Its reflection shimmered softly, breaking into ripples as the wind brushed past the water's surface. If you were to stand by the river thousands of years ago, you might have seen the faint glow of torches flickering on the horizon, the glow of a temple rising under the stars. Egypt's temples were not just buildings. They were breathing monuments, built to bridge the mortal and the divine, crafted so that the gods themselves might walk among men. Each dawn began with ritual. Priests in white linen robes purified themselves in sacred pools before stepping inside. Vast halls lined with towering columns carved with symbols of lotus and papyrus. The air inside the temples was cool and filled with the scent of incense and burning oils. Every wall whispered stories, hymns to Amun-Ra, Isis, and 1,000 other divine forces that governed the balance of existence. Light filtered through narrow openings above, illuminating clouds of dust that hung suspended like spirits between heaven and earth. At the heart of every temple was the sanctuary, a dark, silent chamber where only the high priest or the pharaoh could enter. Inside stood a statue of the god, resting within a gilded shrine. Offerings of food, wine, and flowers were placed before it. Each morning, the god was awakened through chants, his statue washed and dressed anew, as though he were truly alive. For the Egyptians, the gods were not distant. They were constant companions, protectors, and forces woven into every breath of life. The most magnificent of these temples stood at Karnak and Luxor. Karnak was a city of gods, within a city of men, a sprawling complex where each pharaoh left his mark over centuries. Rows upon rows of colossal columns reached toward the sky, each covered in inscriptions telling the stories of victories, prayers, and devotion. When sunlight poured through the hypostyle hall, it was as if the gods themselves had descended in beams of gold. Luxor, just south along the Nile, was its mirror smaller but more intimate, devoted to the divine essence of kingship. Together, Karnak and Luxor formed the spiritual heartbeat of Thebes, linked by a grand avenue lined with sphinxes. During festivals, priests would carry the statues of the gods along this path, while crowds sang, danced, and offered flowers. It was said that during those moments, the line between divine and human blurred, and the air itself shimmered with sacred energy. Temples were not built merely of stone, they were built of meaning. Each measurement followed divine geometry. Each shadow cast by the sun was intentional. As centuries passed, some temples fell into ruin, swallowed by the desert, while others remained standing, solemn and unyielding, guardians of the faith that once pulsed through Egypt's golden heart. Even now, if you visit Karnak at dawn, when the first light touches the hieroglyphs, you can almost hear the faint echo of chanting priests, calling the gods to awaken once more. These were not just monuments to belief, but reflections of human hope, a hope that somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond time itself, the gods were listening. And in that quiet faith, Egypt found its eternity. But even the brightest sun must one day set. The sands of Egypt had seen glory, power, and endless faith. Yet no kingdom escapes the hand of time. Slowly, almost gently at first, the golden age began to fade. The great temples still stood, and the priests still sang. But something was changing. The Nile continued to flow, but the unity that once bound Egypt began to crumble. Pharaohs came and went, each trying to hold together a kingdom that was slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. The cost of wars, of monuments, of endless construction had drained the wealth of the land. The once mighty power that had stretched across Africa and the Middle East began to falter. Foreign armies noticed. From the east came the Hyksos, chariot-riding invaders, who brought with them new weapons and new ways of war. For the first time in centuries, Egypt bowed to outsiders. The people watched as foreign rulers sat on their throne, their traditions blending uneasily with the old. But Egypt did not die. Like the Nile, it adapted. New pharaohs rose, driving out the invaders and restoring the old ways. Yet, with every invasion, a piece of the old world was lost. Centuries later, the shadow of empire returned in greater force. The Assyrians came, then the Persians, their banners flying over the same cities that had once worshipped Ra and Osiris. The temples still glowed in the sun, but now foreign kings claimed to serve the gods of Egypt. The language of the priests, once sacred, began to sound strange even to the people who lived beside the Nile. Then came the Greeks, led by Alexander the Great, who entered Egypt not as a conqueror, but as a savior. The people, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him as a son of the gods. In his honor, the city of Alexandria was founded, a new jewel by the sea. It became a place of learning, knowledge, and trade, where scholars from across the world gathered. For a moment, Egypt found new life, though it was no longer the same. Egypt that had built pyramids or worshipped in hidden valleys. The line of pharaohs continued through the Ptolemy, Greek rulers who embraced the ancient customs to claim divine right. Among them was Cleopatra, the last and most famous of Egypt's rulers. She was intelligent, cunning, and brave, mastering politics in a world dominated by empires. But her love and alliances with Rome would draw Egypt into a web from which it could not escape. When Cleopatra died, Egypt fell under Roman rule. The banners of Ra were replaced by the standards of Rome. The temples grew quiet. The statues of the gods were abandoned to dust. The once sacred hieroglyphs, carved in the language of the gods, were forgotten, their meaning buried in silence for nearly 2,000 years. The empire that had lasted longer than any other in history had finally closed its eyes. Yet even in its fall, Egypt never truly vanished. The desert preserved its tombs, its pyramids, and its secrets, patiently waiting for time to remember. And when centuries later, explorers brushed away the sand and read the hieroglyphs once more, Egypt awoke again. So, as the night deepens and your breathing slows, remember this: even the greatest empires can fade, but their stories endure. Egypt's glory was not in its power or its riches. It was in its dream of eternity. And tonight, that dream still glows softly, like the last embers of a golden sun sinking into the sands. Asterisk, the night is almost still now. The wind over the Nile has quieted, and the stars seem to hang lower, watching with gentle light. Thousands of years have passed since the last pharaoh closed his eyes, and yet Egypt still breathes. Its story did not end when the crowns were lost or the temples turned to dust. It simply changed form, finding new life in memory, in stone, and in the dreams of those who would come after. When Egypt fell under foreign rule, the gods seemed to fall silent. The priests vanished, their sacred scrolls hidden away in forgotten chambers. The pyramids stood alone in the desert, their purpose no longer understood. For the first time in millennia, the sands covered more than bones. They covered an entire world of meaning. But the desert, silent and patient, was never cruel. It guarded what it buried. Every grain of sand became a keeper of secrets, waiting for someone to listen again. Centuries rolled by, empires rose and fell. Rome gave way to Byzantium, and Byzantium to the tides of new faiths and nations. Still, the pyramids stood, their edges softened by time, their mysteries unspoken. Travelers passed them with awe. Some said they were built by giants, others by lost gods. None knew their truth. And then, one day, the curiosity of the world returned. In the early 19th century, explorers, scholars, and dreamers began to arrive in Egypt once more. They came from distant lands, drawn by whispers of an ancient glory. They saw the colossal statues buried to their shoulders in sand, the temple walls half swallowed by time, and their hearts filled with wonder. Men like Shang Polyang, who deciphered the Rosetta Stone, gave voice back to the silent hieroglyphs. For the first time in 2,000 years, the words of the pharaohs were read again. The walls spoke, the gods sang, and Egypt awoke from its slumber. It was as if the old kingdom itself had been sleeping, and the world had whispered, "Rise." Archaeologists uncovered tombs that still shimmered with gold, their colors bright as the day they were painted. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was like a spark in the dark, a doorway to a forgotten world flung open. Inside lay the untouched belongings of a king who had lived and died 3,000 years before. His chariots, his jewelry, his throne, even his sandals. And upon his face, that golden mask, serene, youthful, eternal. The world stood in silence before it, feeling, perhaps for the first time, the weight of immortality. As the years passed, the mysteries of Egypt unfolded one by one. Temples were mapped, mummies unwrapped, and the stories of forgotten queens and generals pieced together like fragments of a dream. Yet, for every secret uncovered, 1,000 more remained. Beneath the desert, there are still chambers waiting to be found, names waiting to be spoken, lives waiting to be remembered. And beyond the discoveries, Egypt began to speak not just through history, but through emotion. Its beauty, its stillness, its impossible endurance became a mirror for human longing. It reminded us that all civilizations, no matter how powerful, are fragile, that glory fades, but meaning does not. The pharaohs built their monuments to outlast death, and in a way, they succeeded. Because every time someone stands before a pyramid, or listens to a story beneath the quiet hum of the night, their dream continues, now as you lie still. Listening to this story in the dark, imagine you are drifting across the Nile one last time. The water glows faintly beneath the moon. On the banks, you can just see the silhouettes of temples, their columns tall and broken, but proud. Somewhere in the distance, a heron lifts off the water, its wings brushing the air in silence. The desert breathes slow and deep, as if asleep. The pharaohs are gone, but their whispers remain in the rustle of the sand, the glint of the stars, the eternal flow of the Nile. Their world was built upon the belief that life never truly ends, that everything that dies is simply transformed. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps in the rhythm of your heartbeat, in the soft breath between waking and sleep, something ancient still stirs. The story of Egypt is not just history. It is a lullaby written in stone, one that humankind has been humming for 5,000 years. And as it fades into the quiet of the night, let it remind you that even when time erases everything, what is loved, remembered, and told again never truly disappears. So rest now, traveler. The journey through the sands is complete. The stars above are the same that once guided the builders of pyramids and the keepers of the gods. Let their calm light follow you into dreams, because tonight, as Egypt sleeps beneath the desert, it carries you gently with it into the endless peace of time. Asterisk, I hope by now your eyes are heavy, and your thoughts are floating through the ancient sands of Egypt. Perhaps you can see the pyramids glowing under a silver moon, or hear the whispers of forgotten kings carried by the desert wind. The story has come to an end, and I'll let the gentle music take over now, to guide you deeper into your dreams. Rest well, my friend. I'm going to sleep too, until we meet again on another quiet night with another story from the pages of time. Good night, and dream softly.